Don't you dare look at me with those lying eyes, you worthless piece of trash." Judge Arthur Graves's voice drips with venom as Ava Sterling simply tries to meet his gaze. His face contorts with disgust. "You think you can waltz into my courtroom wearing that pathetic costume and fool anyone? I see right through you." He pounds his gavel like a weapon. "I hereby accuse you of theft, Miss Sterling. $3,000. Just another ghetto rat who couldn't keep her dirty hands off honest people's money." "Your Honor!" Ava's voice cuts through his tirade, calm and precise. "This proceeding is highly irregular." "Shut your mouth!" Graves roars. "You don't speak unless I tell you to speak, criminal. I've been cleaning filth like you off these streets for 25 years. Ava's manicured fingers tighten on her expensive briefcase. Her eyes flash, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Have you ever watched a predator forget they might be facing an apex hunter? Judge Graves straightens his black robes like armor, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "Since this defendant clearly thinks she can waste my time with lies and theatrics, I'm taking personal control of this case." Ava's court-appointed lawyer, a nervous young man clutching a thin folder, starts to rise. "Your Honor, I don't think—" "Sit down, counsel. This is cut and dry." Graves waves him off like swatting a fly. "When guilt is this obvious, we don't need to pretend there's any mystery here." The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman in a crisp gray suit, exchanges an uncomfortable glance with the defense attorney. This isn't how proceedings normally work. Judges don't typically act as both arbiter and accuser. "The defendant, Ava Sterling," Graves begins, his voice taking on the cadence of a prosecutor delivering opening statements, "stands accused of theft in the amount of $3,000 from her employer, Sterling Corp Holdings. But this isn't just about money, ladies and gentlemen of the jury." He pauses dramatically, letting his gaze sweep across the 12 faces in the jury box. "This is about the kind of person who thinks the rules don't apply to them. The kind who believes they can take what honest, hard-working people have earned." Ava sits perfectly still at the defendant's table, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. The gold trim catches the light as she writes in precise, measured strokes. Her handwriting is surprisingly elegant, each letter formed with the kind of discipline that comes from years of practice. On August 22nd, at approximately 1:30 p.m., security cameras captured the defendant in the vicinity of the office safe during her lunch break. Graves clicks a remote and a grainy black and white image appears on the courtroom's display screen. She claimed she was looking for office supplies, but ask yourselves, what kind of supplies are kept in a secure area? Ava's phone, sitting silently on the table, lights up with an incoming call. The contact name flashes briefly. Chicago Field Office Director Evans. She declines the call without looking up from her notes, but not before jotting something in the margin. The defendant's behavior that day was frankly suspicious from the moment she arrived. Coworkers reported she seemed agitated, nervous. She avoided eye contact with supervisors and spent an unusual amount of time away from her desk. The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably. "Your Honor, perhaps we should allow the evidence to speak for itself through proper examination of witnesses." "I said this is cut and dry." Graves's voice booms through the courtroom. "The evidence is clear. The defendant's guilt is obvious to anyone with half a brain and a functioning pair of eyes." Ava's lawyer attempts another objection. "Your Honor, with respect, the defendant has a right to due process." "Due process?" Graves laughs, a harsh sound that echoes off the oak-paneled walls. "Son, I've been administering justice in this courtroom since before you were out of diapers. I know what due process looks like, and it doesn't include coddling criminals." He turns back to the jury, his expression hardening. You see, this isn't the defendant's first brush with questionable behavior. Her employment history shows a pattern of job hopping, never staying anywhere long enough to build real loyalty or trust. People from her background, from her neighborhood, well, Let's just say they often struggle with concepts like honesty and respect for other people's property. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Ava's pen stops moving for just a moment, then resumes its steady rhythm. She makes another note. This one longer, more detailed. The security footage shows the defendant approaching the safe area at exactly 1:32 p.m. She looks around nervously, checking to make sure no one is watching. Classic criminal behavior. The guilty always reveal themselves through their actions. Ava's phone buzzes again. This time it's a text from OPR Ethics Division. She glances at it briefly, types a quick response, then returns to her notes. At 1:35, the defendant is seen manipulating something near the safe. She claims it was the supply cabinet, but the angle of the camera clearly shows her hands in the proximity of the combination lock. The defense attorney finally manages to speak up. Your Honor, the defendant was never given the combination to that safe. Irrelevant. Graves slams his gavel. Criminals don't need permission to steal, counselor. That's what makes them criminals. Ava writes something else, her handwriting becoming more urgent. To anyone watching closely, it might look like she's taking notes on the judge's statements, but the words she's writing are different. Judicial misconduct, violation of Canon 3A4, appearance of impropriety. The missing $3,000 was discovered at the end of that same day. The defendant was the only employee with both access and opportunity. She fits the profile perfectly. Young, financially unstable, from a demographic that statistically shows higher rates of theft and deception. The court stenographer looks troubled, her fingers hesitating over the keys as she records the judge's increasingly inflammatory statements. The gallery shifts restlessly, sensing something wrong with the proceedings. Your Honor, Ava's lawyer tries again, his voice stronger now. I must object to these characterizations. They're prejudicial and… Prejudicial? Graves's face reddens. What's prejudicial is having to waste taxpayer money on a case this obvious. The defendant took money that didn't belong to her. End of story. Ava's phone lights up once more. Assistant A.G. Peterson. Urgent. She declines the call, but makes another note on her pad. This one underlined twice. Look at her, Graves continues, gesturing toward Ava with obvious disgust. Sitting there in that cheap suit, trying to look respectable. But you can't hide what you're underneath. People like her think they can fool everyone with a costume and some acting, but I've seen it all before. The prosecutor finally stands. Your Honor, I believe we should proceed with proper witness examination. There's nothing to examine. The facts speak for themselves. The defendant is guilty of theft, guilty of lying to this court, and guilty of wasting our time with this charade. Ava continues writing, her expression serene, despite the verbal assault. Her notes now fill multiple pages, each statement carefully documented with timestamps and legal citations. Anyone looking closely might notice she's not just taking notes, she's building a case. This is my courtroom, Graves declares, his voice rising to fill every corner of the space. My rules, my judgment, and I say this defendant is guilty as charged. The court clerk, a woman who's worked in this building for 15 years, stares at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She's never seen a judge conduct proceedings this way, and the wrongness of it settles in her stomach like a stone. Ava sets down her gold-trimmed pen and looks directly at Judge Graves for the first time since his opening tirade. Her gaze is steady, calculating, and utterly fearless. Something passes between them in that moment, a recognition that this is no ordinary defendant sitting in his courtroom. Ava rises slowly from her chair, her movement fluid and controlled. The courtroom falls silent, every eye fixed on this woman who's been systematically humiliated for the past 20 minutes. Your Honor, her voice cuts through the silence like a surgical blade. May I address the court? Judge Graves's eyebrows shoot up in surprise and fury. You may not. Defendants speak when I tell them to speak, and not before. Ava doesn't sit down. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, studying him with the kind of clinical interest a scientist might show toward an interesting specimen. With all due respect, Your Honor, this proceeding is highly irregular. Her voice carries a quiet authority that makes several jurors lean forward. Under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, a defendant has the right to address the court, especially when fundamental due process violations are occurring in real time. The courtroom erupts in whispers. Ava's court-appointed lawyer stares at her in shock. Where did his seemingly helpless client learn to cite federal criminal procedure from memory? Graves's face darkens to the color of old brick. Don't you dare lecture me about the law, criminal. I've been practicing law since before you were born. Then you should know, Ava continues with devastating calm, that Canon 3A of the Code of Judicial Conduct prohibits a judge from acting as both prosecutor and arbiter. You're currently violating judicial ethics standards that have been in place since 1974. The prosecutor's mouth falls open. The defense attorney fumbles for his legal pad, frantically trying to catch up with his client's superior knowledge of courtroom procedure. Ava's phone buzzes against the defendant's table. The screen lights up with a text from Director Evans, DOJ. Status update needed ASAP. She glances at it briefly, then looks back at the judge with renewed intensity. Furthermore, Ava continues, her voice gaining strength, your comments about my background and demographic constitute judicial bias under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Every statement you've made is being recorded by the court's stenographer and will be subject to appellate review. Judge Graves slams his gavel so hard the sound echoes like a gunshot. Shut your mouth. You don't get to quote law at me in my own courtroom. Actually, Ava says, pulling a small recording device from her briefcase and placing it on the table, I believe accurate legal procedure is exactly what's needed here. This entire proceeding should be documented for review by appropriate federal authorities. The court clerk looks up sharply. Federal authorities. Who is this defendant? Ava's lawyer finally finds his voice. Miss Sterling, perhaps we should discuss. I appreciate your concern, counsel, but I've studied the system more extensively than you might imagine. Ava's smile is gentle, but her eyes are steel. I spent yesterday working remotely on federal compliance review, which is why I can speak with some authority about proper judicial conduct. Judge Graves's face has moved beyond red into purple territory. Federal compliance? What kind of nonsense are you spouting now? The kind that comes from working with colleagues in Chicago who monitor judicial behavior patterns. Ava's voice is conversational now, almost friendly. They find cases like this particularly illuminating. Her phone lights up again. This time it's Chief Justice Office. Administrative. She declines the call but makes a note. Documentation complete. Proceeding as planned. The prosecutor stands up, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, perhaps we should take a brief recess to— There will be no recess, Graves roars. This defendant thinks she can disrupt my courtroom with legal mumbo-jumbo, but I won't be intimidated by some criminal who watched too many law shows. Ava opens her briefcase, the expensive leather one that's been puzzling observers, and withdraws a thick manila folder. Your Honor, I'd like to formally request that all proceedings be preserved for federal review. Every transcript, every recording, every judicial statement made here today. Federal review? Graves's voice cracks slightly. What are you talking about? I'm talking about transparency, Your Honor. Justice works best in the light. Ava's fingers drum against the folder, and observers notice her nails aren't just manicured. They're professionally done, the kind of maintenance that suggests significant disposable income. Some authorities in Chicago take a very keen interest in patterns of judicial misconduct, especially when they involve civil rights violations. The defense attorney stares at his client with growing amazement. Ms. Sterling, where did you learn to— I've had extensive experience with federal courtroom procedure, Ava interrupts smoothly, more than most people might expect from someone in my current position. Her phone buzzes again. Assistant A.G. Peterson, ready for signal? Ava glances at the message, then at Judge Graves, who's beginning to look genuinely nervous for the first time. Your Honor, Ava continues, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of practice. I notice you haven't actually reviewed the evidence against me. You've simply assumed guilt based on circumstantial details and, frankly, apparent bias. Under Brady v. Maryland, I have the right to examine all evidence, including the chain of custody for that security footage you found so compelling. The courtroom is dead silent now. Even the court reporter has stopped typing, staring at this defendant who's systematically dismantling the judge's case with surgical precision. The footage you showed, Ava says, consulting her notes, lacks proper authentication under Federal Rule of Evidence 901. The timestamp appears inconsistent, and there's no documentation of who had access to the recording between the alleged incident and this trial. Judge Graves's hands shake slightly as he grips his gavel. You can't just— This is highly unusual. What's unusual, Your Honor, is a sitting judge predetermining guilt before hearing evidence. What's unusual is the complete abandonment of due process in favor of personal bias. Ava's voice rises slightly, and for the first time, there's a hint of steel beneath the silk. But don't worry. Everything that's happened here today is being very carefully documented. She taps the folder in front of her. Some investigations require patience, Your Honor. Some patterns only become clear after sufficient documentation. The judge stares at her, and something like fear flickers across his face. Who is this woman? How does a theft defendant know more about federal criminal procedure than most lawyers? Ava sits back down, her expensive briefcase at her side, her recording device still running. I believe we should proceed with the evidence presentation now, Your Honor. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to take that recess after all. The modest apartment door clicks shut behind Ava, and for the first time all day, her shoulders relax slightly. She sets down her expensive briefcase and removes the simple navy blazer, revealing what was hidden beneath: a Department of Justice identification badge hanging from a government-issued lanyard. Ava Sterling isn't who she appears to be. She walks to her kitchen counter where 3 burner phones sit charging next to a professional-grade recording device still warm from today's use. Her fingers move with practiced efficiency as she connects the device to her laptop, uploading every word Judge Graves spoke in that courtroom. The first phone rings immediately. Ava answers without looking at the screen. Judicial Integrity Unit. Special Agent Sterling, this is Director Evans. How did Operation Graves proceed today? Ava's voice is crisp, professional, completely different from the measured tones she used in court. Better than expected, Director. The subject took the bait completely. Full documentation captured, including multiple instances of explicit bias and procedural violations. Outstanding. The Attorney General wants a preliminary report by midnight. Are you ready for Phase 2? Ava opens her briefcase and withdraws a thick manila folder labeled Confidential, U.S. Federal Investigation. The file is easily 3 inches thick, stuffed with documents, photographs, and transcripts dating back 8 months. More than ready. Today was case number 47. The pattern is undeniable now. She spreads the contents across her dining table like a general planning a final assault. Photographs of other defendants, all minorities, all treated with the same contempt she experienced today. Audio transcripts of inappropriate comments made in chambers. Statistical analyses showing sentencing disparities that would make civil rights lawyers weep. Ava, Director Evans's voice carries a note of admiration. I have to ask, how did it feel being on the receiving end of that? Ava pauses, looking at a photograph of herself from her Northwestern Law graduation, standing next to her parents with a bright smile and a promising future ahead. Next to it, an awards plaque. Outstanding Achievement in Civil Rights Prosecution, Department of Justice, 2022. Honestly, it felt like every other case I've prosecuted, just from the other side. The anger, the helplessness. That's what our victims feel every day in Graves's courtroom. Today just reminded me why we do this work. She moves to her home office, where law degrees from Northwestern and the University of Chicago Law School hang next to commendations from the FBI and the Civil Rights Division. A map of the judicial district covers one wall, marked with red pins showing every courthouse where complaints about Judge Graves have originated. The pattern forms an almost perfect circle around the poorer, predominantly minority neighborhoods. The second burner phone buzzes. Assistant Attorney General Peterson. Ava, I watched the live stream from the courthouse. That judge practically handed us a federal case on a silver platter. That was the idea, Ava replies, pulling up a secure video call on her laptop. Peterson's face appears on screen, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. 47 documented cases of bias, statistical evidence showing 300% harsher sentencing for black defendants, audio recordings of inappropriate racial commentary, and now we have video evidence of him abandoning due process entirely. Ava nods, scrolling through her files. The beauty is he doesn't know any of it exists. Graves thinks he's been operating in the shadows, but we've had surveillance authorization on him for 8 months. Every inappropriate comment, every biased ruling, every civil rights violation, all documented with federal precision. She clicks open a file labeled, Tomorrow, Phase 2. Inside are blueprints of the courthouse, a list of federal marshals assigned to the operation, and a detailed timeline for the judge's arrest. The theft charge against me is completely fabricated, of course. Sterling Corp Holdings has been cooperating with us from the beginning. Their CEO is testifying before Congress next month about corporate responsibility in reporting judicial corruption. Peterson leans forward on the screen. Ava, I have to say, going undercover like this, subjecting yourself to that kind of treatment, it was above and beyond. Ava looks at her reflection in the laptop screen, seeing not the humble defendant from this afternoon, but the federal prosecutor who's spent 7 years building cases against corrupt judges. Justice isn't always comfortable, ma'am. Sometimes you have to let the system reveal its true nature before you can fix it. She closes the laptop and returns to the dining table, where 47 cases of documented injustice wait for their day in federal court. Tomorrow, Judge Arthur Graves will discover that the woman he humiliated is the same prosecutor who's been building the case that will end his career. The courthouse doors swing open with unusual authority as FBI digital forensics expert Dr. Evelyn Reed enters, her credentials folder already open in her hand. Behind her, 2 additional federal agents take seats in the gallery, their presence immediately shifting the room's energy. Judge Graves's face pales slightly. What is the meaning of this? I didn't authorize any federal witnesses. Ava's court-appointed lawyer, who suddenly seems far more confident than he did yesterday, stands with newfound authority. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Reed to testify regarding the authenticity of the security footage presented as evidence. Objection. The prosecutor rises quickly, but her voice lacks conviction. Something about the federal agent's presence has clearly rattled her. This witness wasn't on any disclosure list. Dr. Reed approaches the witness stand with the kind of precision that comes from testifying before federal judges who don't tolerate incompetence. Your Honor, I was contacted yesterday evening by the Department of Justice to provide emergency technical analysis on potentially fabricated evidence. Judge Graves's gavel hand trembles slightly. Department of Justice? What does the DOJ have to do with a simple theft case? Ava sits quietly at the defendant's table, but observant spectators notice her posture has changed. Gone is the submissive defendant from yesterday. Her spine is straight, her gaze steady, and she's taking notes with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what's coming. Dr. Reed settles into the witness stand and opens her laptop. Your Honor, I've conducted a comprehensive digital analysis of the security footage presented yesterday. I'm afraid the results are quite troubling. Troubling how? Judge Graves's voice cracks slightly. The footage has been digitally altered. Specifically, the timestamp has been manipulated to show the defendant in the secure area during her alleged lunch break. However, metadata analysis reveals the actual timestamp places this footage at 3:15 a.m. on a Saturday, when the building was completely empty. The courtroom erupts in whispers. Ava's lawyer nods as if this is exactly what he expected to hear. Furthermore, Dr. Reed continues, clicking to a new slide. The figure shown in the footage has been digitally inserted. The lighting inconsistencies and pixel degradation patterns clearly indicate post-production manipulation. Judge Graves's face has gone from pale to green. This is highly unusual. I question the reliability of this so-called analysis. Ava's phone lights up with a text from FBI Director, Operational Command, Phase 2 authorized, marshals in position. The second federal agent, a stern-looking man in his 50s, approaches the court clerk and hands her an official document. The clerk's eyes widen as she reads it. Then she immediately walks it to the judge. Your Honor, the clerk's voice is barely above a whisper. This is a federal preservation order. All court proceedings are to be recorded and preserved for Department of Justice review. Dr. Reed continues her testimony, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the bench. Additionally, I've cross-referenced the defendant's location during the time period in question. According to federal building access logs, Ms. Sterling was actually at Department of Justice headquarters in Chicago at the exact time this alleged theft occurred. Ava's lawyer produces a manila folder thick with official documents. Your Honor, I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A, federal building access logs from DOJ headquarters showing Ms. Sterling badged into the building at 10:52 a.m. and badged out at 5:17 p.m. on the day in question. Judge Graves stares at the documents as if they might bite him. DOJ headquarters? Why would the defendant be at... Furthermore, Ava's lawyer continues, his confidence growing with each revelation. I present Defense Exhibit B, bank records showing Ms. Sterling's federal salary deposits. Her government income exceeds the allegedly stolen amount by a factor of 15. The prosecutor looks like she wants to crawl under her table. Your Honor, we weren't aware of any federal employment. Ava finally speaks, her voice cutting through the confusion with surgical precision. That's because you didn't bother to investigate. You simply assumed guilt based on appearance and proceeded accordingly. Judge Graves slams his gavel, but the sound lacks its earlier authority. The defendant will not speak out of turn. Actually, Ava's lawyer says, consulting what appears to be a very official-looking document, my client has every right to speak, especially given that she's been working remotely on federal judicial oversight assignments. Dr. Reed pulls up another slide. I should also mention that during my analysis, I discovered this isn't the first time security footage in cases before this court has been questionable. I've identified at least 12 other instances of suspicious digital evidence, all in cases involving minority defendants. The federal agents in the gallery exchange meaningful glances. One speaks quietly into a concealed radio device. Judge Graves's hands are visibly shaking now. This is all very irregular. I don't know what kind of conspiracy this is, but I won't have my courtroom turned into a circus. Ava's phone buzzes again. U.S. Attorney General, ready when you are. She looks up at Judge Graves, and for the first time, Her expression carries something that makes him step back slightly. It's not fear or submission. It's the look of a predator who's been patiently waiting for the right moment. Your Honor, Ava's lawyer says, producing yet another official document. I should mention that I'm not actually court-appointed counsel. I'm Senior Counsel David Chen from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The courtroom falls dead silent. Judge Graves's face goes white as bone. Chen continues, his voice now carrying the full weight of federal authority. I've been assigned to observe these proceedings as part of an ongoing federal investigation into judicial misconduct patterns in this district. Dr. Reed saves her analysis and closes her laptop. Your Honor, based on my technical examination, there is no credible evidence that Ms. Sterling committed any theft. The entire case appears to have been fabricated. Judge Graves tries to regain control, but his voice is barely a whisper. This court rejects these outside agencies have no jurisdiction. Ava stands slowly, her movement fluid and commanding. Every eye in the courtroom fixes on her as she reaches for her briefcase. Not the nervous gesture of a defendant, but the confident motion of someone who's been in complete control from the very beginning. Your Honor, Ava says, her voice carrying an authority that makes several jurors sit up straighter. Before you make any more statements that might further incriminate you, there's something this court needs to know. The federal marshals quietly move closer to the bench. Ava reaches into her briefcase with deliberate precision, withdrawing not just papers, but a leather credential wallet that catches the courtroom light like a weapon. The federal marshals step forward slightly, their hands moving instinctively toward their service weapons. Judge Graves' voice comes out as a strangled whisper. What? What are you doing? Ava stands to her full height, and suddenly the modest defendant who entered this courtroom yesterday is gone entirely. In her place stands a woman with the bearing of absolute authority, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. Your Honor, Ava says, her voice now carrying the full weight of federal power. Before you compound your judicial misconduct any further, this court needs to understand exactly who I am. She flips open the credential wallet, revealing a gold federal badge and identification card that makes Judge Graves's face drain of all color. I am Senior Federal Prosecutor Ava Elizabeth Sterling, United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Her voice rings through the courtroom like a bell. And Your Honor, you're under federal investigation, sir. The courtroom explodes. Gasps echo off the oak-paneled walls. Jurors crane their necks to see better. The court stenographer's hands freeze over her keyboard. Judge Graves's mouth opens and closes like a fish drowning in air. You're what? Ava steps forward, no longer the humble defendant, but a federal prosecutor delivering the most satisfying case of her career. For the past 8 months, I've been conducting an undercover investigation into your systematic pattern of judicial misconduct, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. She produces the thick manila folder, spreading documents across the defendant's table like an attorney presenting overwhelming evidence. This theft case? Completely fabricated. Sterling Corp Holdings has been cooperating with the federal government since day one. There was no crime, Your Honor. There was only bait. Graves's hands clutch the bench so tightly his knuckles turn white. This is impossible. You can't. Federal prosecutors don't. What? Don't go undercover to catch corrupt judges who think they're above the law? Ava's smile is sharp as a blade. Your Honor, you've just spent 2 days demonstrating exactly why this investigation was necessary. The federal marshals move into position behind the judge's bench as Ava continues her devastating revelation. Every word you've spoken, every biased ruling you've made, every racist comment you've delivered from that bench, all of it recorded, documented, and preserved for federal prosecution. Ava's voice grows stronger with each syllable. Did you really think you could abuse your authority indefinitely without consequences? Judge Graves tries to pound his gavel, but his hands are shaking so violently he can barely grip it. This is entrapment. This is illegal. You can't. What's illegal, Your Honor, is a federal judge abandoning due process to persecute defendants based on their race. Ava's voice cuts through his protests like a sword. What's illegal is using your position to systematically deny civil rights to minority defendants. She pulls out a tablet, swiping to a video compilation that begins playing on the courtroom's display screen. It shows Graves in 47 different cases, each one demonstrating the same pattern of bias, the same contemptuous language, the same abuse of power. 47 documented cases, Your Honor. 47 times you used that gavel as a weapon against people you considered beneath you. The video shows him dismissing black defendants without hearing evidence, making racist comments about their kind, and systematically handing down harsher sentences based purely on skin color. Graves's face has gone from white to gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. You tricked me. This isn't fair. Ava's laugh is as cold as winter. Fair? Your Honor, you've spent 25 years denying fairness to defendants who had no voice, no power, no way to fight back. Today you discovered what happens when your victim fights back. The lead federal marshal steps forward, his voice carrying official authority. The Honorable Arthur Graves, by order of the United States Department of Justice, you are hereby removed from this bench pending federal criminal charges. Ava walks closer to the bench, looking up at the man who spent yesterday treating her like garbage. You said you could spot a criminal from across the room, Your Honor. You were right. You were looking at one every morning in the mirror. Federal marshals move to escort positions as Ava delivers her final words to the corrupt judge. Justice doesn't discriminate, Your Honor, but you do. And now you'll answer to federal law for every single violation. Judge Graves slumps in his chair, the weight of 25 years of corruption finally crushing down on him. Ava moves behind the prosecution table with the fluid confidence of someone who's argued cases before the Supreme Court. Judge Graves, now stripped of his authority and seated where defendants usually sit, looks small and pathetic in his wrinkled robes. Mr. Graves, Ava begins, her voice carrying the kind of prosecutorial authority that's convicted dozens of corrupt officials. You are no longer entitled to the honorific Your Honor. That title requires honor. The acting federal judge who's replaced Graves nods approvingly from the bench. Federal proceedings don't tolerate the kind of misconduct that just transpired. Ava approaches the evidence table, where she's arranged her 47 case files in neat stacks. Mr. Graves, do you recognize this defendant? She holds up a photograph of Isabella Rossi, a young Latina woman who appeared before Graves 8 months ago. Graves's voice is barely a whisper. I see many defendants. Ms. Rossi was charged with shoplifting items worth $12. You sentenced her to 60 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Ava's voice sharpens like a blade. The average sentence for first-time shoplifting in this district is community service. Can you explain the discrepancy? Every case is different. Ava pulls out another file. What about Marcus Cole? First-time marijuana possession. You gave him 6 months. The state guidelines recommend probation for first offenders. She moves closer to Graves, her presence now overwhelming him completely. Or Sofia Garcia, driving with an expired license. You revoked her car, her only means of getting to work to support her 3 children. Graves tries to maintain some dignity. I was within my judicial discretion. Judicial discretion? Ava's laugh is ice cold. Let's talk about discretion, Mr. Graves. She activates the courtroom's display screen, showing a statistical analysis that makes several federal observers lean forward with interest. This chart shows sentencing patterns in your courtroom over the past 5 years. Black defendants received sentences averaging 312% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Hispanic defendants received sentences 247% longer. The numbers hit the courtroom like physical blows. Federal investigators scribble notes furiously. Ava pulls out a thick folder. These are transcripts of your comments in chambers, Mr. Graves. Would you like me to read them aloud? Graves's face goes ashen. Those were private conversations. Private conversations where you referred to black defendants as animals and Hispanic defendants as illegals, regardless of their citizenship status. Ava's voice rises with righteous fury. Private conversations where you laughed about sending minorities to jail to clean up the neighborhood. She approaches the bench, addressing the federal judge. Your Honor, I'd like to present Federal Exhibit 27A, audio recordings of the defendant's chambers conversations obtained through federal court-authorized surveillance. Graves's voice cracks. You recorded me? We recorded a federal judge committing civil rights violations. Yes. Ava's smile is predatory. Just like you recorded your own confession yesterday, when you abandoned all pretense of justice to prosecute me based purely on racial bias. Ava pulls out another stack of documents. Mr. Graves, are you familiar with the case of Lincoln Park Academy versus Board of Education? What does that have to do with anything? You denied a petition for adequate legal representation to 63 minority students whose civil rights were being violated. You called their case frivolous without reading a single page of their legal briefs. Ava's voice builds to a crescendo. Those students were being systematically denied educational opportunities. Your ruling condemned an entire generation of children to substandard education. Why? Because you couldn't be bothered to treat minority petitioners with basic human dignity. Graves slumps further in his chair. I made judicial decisions based on the law. You made racist decisions based on your personal prejudices. Ava's voice echoes through the courtroom. You turned that bench into a weapon of oppression. She spreads 47 files across the evidence table like playing cards, revealing a royal flush. 47 cases, Mr. Graves. 47 families destroyed by your bias. 47 people who trusted the American justice system and instead found you. Ava's voice drops to a whisper that somehow carries more power than her shouts. Every single one of these defendants was innocent until proven guilty, Mr. Graves. But in your courtroom, they were guilty until proven white. Federal marshals step forward as Ava delivers her final prosecution statement. Mr. Graves, you swore an oath to provide equal justice under law. Instead, you perverted that oath into a license for racial persecution. Today, federal justice catches up with you. The federal judge gavels the court to order as Ava takes her position at the prosecution table, no longer hidden behind a facade, but standing as the full authority of the United States government. Federal marshals flank the courtroom, their presence a stark reminder that this is no longer Graves's domain. The United States of America versus Arthur James Graves, the federal judge announces, his voice carrying the weight of true justice. The defendant stands accused of multiple federal civil rights violations under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Ava rises, her bearing now that of the seasoned federal prosecutor she's always been. Your Honor, the United States will demonstrate that the defendant willfully and systematically denied constitutional rights to citizens under color of law, a federal crime punishable by up to life imprisonment. Graves sits slumped at the defendant's table, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of defeated comprehension. The man who wielded absolute power yesterday now faces the full might of federal justice. Mr. Graves, Ava begins, her voice carrying the authority of every wronged defendant he ever silenced, spent 25 years turning the sacred principle of equal justice into a weapon of racial persecution. The evidence before this court documents not just isolated incidents, but a systematic campaign of terror against minority communities. She approaches the evidence table, where 47 thick case files represent 47 shattered lives. Isabella Rossi lost her job because of his excessive sentence for a $12 shoplifting charge. She couldn't make bail, couldn't afford the fines, and her family fell into poverty. Ava's voice grows stronger with each revelation. Marcus Cole spent 6 months in federal prison for marijuana possession because Mr. Graves wanted to send a message to his people. Marcus lost his apartment, his job, and his chance at college. The federal judge listens intently as Ava continues her devastating presentation. Sofia Garcia's car was impounded for an expired license. Without transportation, she lost her job and couldn't take her diabetic son to medical appointments. The child ended up hospitalized because of delayed treatment. Ava turns to face Graves directly. Each of these cases represents a family destroyed, a life derailed, a constitutional right trampled by your prejudice. Sound federal investigators present additional evidence. Financial records showing Graves's coordination with private prison companies, audio recordings of him bragging about high incarceration rates at judicial conferences, and statistical analyses proving systematic bias beyond any reasonable doubt. The defendant's actions constitute conspiracy against rights under federal law, Ava continues. He used his position to deprive citizens of equal protection, due process, and fair treatment under the 14th Amendment. Chief Federal Judge Eleanor Vance, specially assigned to handle judicial corruption cases, reviews the evidence with the kind of thorough attention Graves never gave his victims. Furthermore, Ava presents the final piece of evidence. Yesterday's proceedings demonstrate the defendant's complete disregard for constitutional principles. He abandoned judicial neutrality to personally prosecute a defendant based solely on racial animus. Ava's voice rises to fill the courtroom. Mr. Graves didn't just break his judicial oath. He weaponized it against the very people the Constitution was designed to protect. The federal prosecutor from the Civil Rights Division joins Ava at the table. Your Honor, the United States also charges conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power under color of law. Mr. Graves's actions constitute crimes against the constitutional order itself. Judge Vance addresses Graves directly. Mr. Graves, you are hereby found guilty on all federal charges. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Graves's shoulders shake as the weight of federal justice crushes down on him. Please, I have a family. I made mistakes, but... Ava's voice cuts through his pleas like steel. Every defendant you destroyed had a family too, Mr. Graves. You showed them no mercy. Federal law shows you the justice they deserved. Federal marshals move forward as Judge Vance continues. Furthermore, all cases tried in Mr. Graves's courtroom over the past 5 years will undergo mandatory federal review. Any conviction tainted by bias will be overturned immediately. Ava delivers the final blow. Mr. Graves, 127 wrongful convictions are being vacated today. 127 people are getting their lives back because federal justice doesn't discriminate. The courtroom erupts as families of Graves's victims realize their loved ones will finally receive justice. Tears flow freely as years of injustice begin to unravel. Additionally, Judge Vance announces, Mr. Graves's pension and benefits are forfeited. All assets will be liquidated to provide restitution to his victims. Ava approaches Graves one final time as federal marshals prepare to escort him away. "You said you could spot criminals, Mr. Graves. You were right. You just never realized you were looking at yourself." Federal marshals place handcuffs on the former judge as Ava delivers her final statement to the court. "Your Honor, this investigation has revealed systemic corruption requiring federal oversight of this entire judicial district. The Department of Justice recommends permanent federal monitoring to ensure constitutional rights are protected." As Graves is led away in handcuffs, Ava stands victorious, not just for herself, but for every defendant who suffered under his corrupt regime. Federal justice has prevailed, and the constitutional promise of equal treatment under law has been restored. The gavel falls with the sound of true justice, finally served. 8 months later, Arthur Graves sits in a federal prison cell, his judicial robes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his gavel traded for a plastic spoon. The man who once wielded absolute power now stands in line for prison meals, his pension stripped, his legacy destroyed, his name synonymous with judicial corruption. Ava Sterling stands before a joint session of Congress, her federal prosecutor's badge gleaming under the chamber lights. "Senators, representatives, today I can report that federal oversight has successfully dismantled a 25-year pattern of judicial corruption that denied constitutional rights to thousands of Americans. The transformation is complete. The humble defendant who entered Graves's courtroom has become the face of judicial reform. Her undercover operation now taught in law schools as a master class in federal investigation. 127 wrongful convictions have been overturned," Ava continues, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Families torn apart by bias have been reunited. Justice denied has become justice delivered. In courthouses across the district, new protocols monitor every sentence, every ruling, every judicial decision for signs of bias. Federal observers sit in galleries, ensuring that constitutional rights are protected, that equal justice under law isn't just a motto carved in marble." Ava's promotion to Director of Federal Judicial Integrity represents more than career advancement. It's validation that courage and truth can topple even the most entrenched corruption. At the Ava Sterling Foundation for Legal Justice, young law students from underrepresented communities receive scholarships, mentorship, and training in civil rights prosecution. Ava herself teaches a weekly seminar, "When the System Fails, Federal Solutions to Local Corruption." "Remember," Ava tells her students, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that once intimidated a corrupt judge. "Justice isn't passive. It requires action, courage, and sometimes sacrifice. But when you fight for what's right, you're never fighting alone." Isabella Rossi now works as a paralegal, her wrongful conviction expunged, her life rebuilt with federal assistance. Marcus Cole graduated law school on a foundation scholarship, preparing to become the civil rights attorney his community needs. Sofia Garcia owns her own business, the criminal record that once defined her future erased by federal justice. Their stories, once buried under judicial bias, now inspire a new generation of legal advocates who understand that the Constitution's promises must be actively defended. Ava's final case summary sits framed in her DOJ office, Operation Graves. 47 documented violations, 127 convictions overturned, 1 corrupt judge imprisoned, 1 judicial district reformed, countless lives restored. But the real victory isn't measured in statistics. It's measured in restored faith that justice can prevail when brave people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. This story proves that federal oversight can stop judicial corruption when courageous prosecutors take action. Every badge, every oath, every position of power carries the responsibility to protect constitutional rights, not abuse them. Have you witnessed judicial bias that needs federal investigation? Share this story to show others that even judges answer to federal law. Like and subscribe for more federal justice stories where courage confronts corruption and constitutional rights triumph over prejudice. What case of judicial misconduct would you want federal prosecutors to investigate next? Comment below, because justice depends on citizens who refuse to stay silent when they witness abuse of power. The Constitution protects everyone, but only when people like Ava fight to make that promise real.